How's it going, folks? Welcome back to Callahan's Garage. Today we are back looking at David's 65 Volkswagen Beetle. We finished up the rear end, so we did a rear apron, rear quarter panel sections, and got a bunch of stuff fixed back there. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out, leave a like and comment and all that good stuff. Today we are going to jump into the front apron on this thing. So we've got some old accident damage on the front end of this thing, some old body filler in the apron skin. So we're going to get the apron skin changed out. We've got a little bit of rust in the spare tire well. We're going to get that patched up and a new apron skin put on here and get the front end of this thing looking much better. So the process of this is going to be very similar to what we did on the back half of the car. And I'm going to walk you guys through step by step of how to do this. Stick around.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
Alright, so let's take a look at this front apron here. You can see where we've got some old body filler around our overrider holes. It's starting to crack apart. Some of our metal's starting to split over here. We've got some body filler along the bottom edge here. So we've got a little bit of rust starting to come through on the bottom of the apron here. And our spare tire well also has some rust that's starting to penetrate all the way through, and we're going to get that fixed up as well. In the grand scheme of things, you know, as far as air-cooled cars go, like this front end is very nice. Like it's not a bad starting point. We don't have any accident damage on our front end here. You know, 9 out of 10 of these cars have been tapped in the front end at some point, and you'll see all this will be wrinkled up and everything, and getting this all straightened back out is really, it can be a headache. So this one's going to be very straightforward. We're simply going to put a new skin on the apron, patch up our spot in the spare tire well, and this car will be, you know, in very nice shape up here in the front. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to get this old apron skin off of here. So we'll pop the trunk latch off. We'll pop the, there's a little brace spot right here for our guide tube, so we'll cut that loose. And then we've just got a series of spot welds, you know, down both sides of the apron and then across the bottom of the apron. So we'll get all that cut loose, get the skin off of here. Then we can start patching up the spare tire well. All right, so one of the trickier parts to removing this front apron skin is getting all of these old spot welds loose. So the way these are attached from the factories, they just have a resistant spot weld machine that comes through here and puts a spot weld, you know, every few inches or so. So we can look down through here, we can see all of these spot welds. So basically what we need to do is get this weld loose. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. The way I prefer is to use the spot weld cutter like this. So if we just look at this, you know, it's got a centering die here, and then it's just a tiny hole saw. And all it's going to do is it's going to center up on that spot weld. It's going to drill our top layer off, and then we can, you know, pry that loose. So what I'll do is take like a piece of 80 grit. This is just an old piece of 80 grit sandpaper. And a lot of times these spot welds can be hard to find. You know, if there's a little bit of surface rust on here, you know, old layers of paint, old undercoating like this, they can be really difficult to see. But if you take just like a piece of 80 grit, you can just kind of scuff up the area where the spot welds are, and they'll stand out a little bit more, make them a little easier to find. So once we know where one's at, we can just take our center punch, take a hammer, and all I'm going to do is give us a spot right in the middle of that spot weld, and that's going to allow our spot weld cutter to sit right in there, stay nice and centered, and we'll get that drilled out. So from there, all I'm going to do is drill this out. And you don't have to go very deep on these. All I'm going to do, you typically, is drill into this until I see some rust come through. When you start to see some of that rust come through, you know you're through that top layer into the second layer. So, you know, just a little bit and that spot weld will pop right loose. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this process for all of these spot welds all the way around, and we can get this apron skin off of here. Alright, so we've got all of our spot welds up and down the sides cut loose. This is all loose on both sides now. The next thing we need to do is we need to get this guide tube for our hood latch cable cut loose. So this is brazed on to the apron skin right here. And a lot of times this is kind of tricky to get cut loose without cutting into this guide tube. So usually what I'll do is just kind of cut around that, and then we can come back and grind this clean once the apron's out of the way. So we also have spot welds all along the bottom of this, and they can be kind of a pain in the butt to get up under here and drill out all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my cutoff wheel and just cut this apron skin loose, and then once this is off and out of here, we can get under here and we can clean up that weld seam a little bit better. Alright, so we've got our front apron skin off. If you look down the side here, you can see where each one of these spot welds were at. And we're going to get all this cleaned up. We're going to get this ground down nice and smooth. We'll get some weld primer sprayed on here so we've got good corrosion protection underneath our new apron. We're going to get our hood cable guide tube cleaned up so we can get that welded onto the new apron. So this is our spare tire weld. This is one of the areas we need to fix on this car. This spot always rusts out on these. You know, the spare tire goes down in here. We get moisture and dirt and grime collected in here, and this just always rusts out. So this one really isn't that bad. We've got a little bit of rust spots in here where it's starting to penetrate all the way through, but that's just going to keep growing and eventually rot this whole thing out. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut, you know, the area of this out. We're going to weld a new piece in here. Now, our spare tire well comes down and then it laps over our apron skin. So our apron skin comes under, our spare tire weld goes over, and this is all spot welded down through here. So since I'm going to cut, you know, a good chunk of this out, I'm not going to spend the time to go and remove this apron skin off of here. I'm just going to cut out the area that I'm going to fix, and then I'll come back here and I'll clean up the sides where we have the old spare tire welds, or the old apron skin still. That way we've got a nice clean surface to put our new apron skin on. So I'm going to get this all knocked out, and then we'll be able to start fitting up our new apron skin. Okay, so we've got all of this cleaned up. I've got my rusted area of my spare tire well cut out. So I've looked over this pretty thoroughly, and we want to do the same thing we did on our rear quarter panels, where we're trying to retain as much original sheet metal as possible. So I've cut out just enough here to eliminate the rust. We're going to put a new piece in here. So we have a new aftermarket piece here. So again, like we did for the rear, I'm going to cut this down to a little more manageable size piece, and then we can start to fit up our patch panel exactly into where we've cut out. So I'm just going to mark this, you know, a little past where we need to be. That way I've got plenty of material left to work with. And I'm just going to cut this section out of our new piece. Okay, so we've got our donor piece trimmed down a little bit. And if we look at this, we can see that our stamping doesn't match up perfectly. So, you know, we need to get this fitting a little bit better before we go cutting this exactly to shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my main stamping here in the center. And then I'm just going to clamp this in place on both of the sides. And once this is clamped in place, I'm going to do some hammering and some shaping on our original sheet metal here and get it to match up a little bit better here. This has been smashed in from being, you know, lowered and, you know, making some contact with the ground periodically as it does. So we're going to get this shaped up a little bit better, get everything matching and fitting up really nice, and then we'll come in here, we'll mark this piece and get it fit exactly to size. Okay, so we've got this shaped out a little bit better. We're not perfectly matching up yet, but once we get this cut and while we're welding it together, we'll get those hammered together and get them fitting really nice and smooth. So the next thing we need to do is trim this down exactly to fit our opening that we've already cut here. So I'm going to take my scribe, and all I'm going to do is just scribe a line right onto my donor piece up against my existing cut on the original piece. And what this scribe is going to do is give me a very precise line to cut on. So a lot of times, you know, if you use a Sharpie or a soapstone or something like that to do this, you know, you'll get a really fat line, and if you mistakenly cut on one side of the line or the other, or right in the middle of the line, you know, you may end up with a much larger gap here to weld up than you want, and that just makes the whole process a little bit more difficult. So using something like this to, you know, get a very accurate cut line, you know, is just going to make our job a little bit easier in the next step. So now we can take this out. And if we look at this, you know, this black E-coat gives us a really good contrast, and we can see exactly where that scribe line is. So we'll get this cut out, trimmed up, cleaned up, and then we'll be ready to start welding it in here. Okay, so we've got our new piece trimmed down. We've got all of our E-coat cleaned up around the edges, so it's ready to weld in. So this is the point where a lot of people would start to panic, because we've got this piece cut out and we stick it up here and it just doesn't look like it fits well at all. So when you have your donor piece, you know, clamped up in here in place and it's pulling it up to form to the bottom of this, it's going to fit a little bit differently than it will when we cut it out and we don't have any tension holding this piece in place. So if we sit this up here right now, just like that, we've got big gaps on both the sides and both of our corners. But if we just put, you know, a little bit of tension on this piece and flex it up a little bit, it closes up those corners a lot. So when I'm putting in a piece like this, what I'll do is I'll match up my center main stamping here. So like the main part, the center of the piece, the main, you know, stamped out part of the piece is where I'm going to start. So I'll fit this section up right here in the middle, really nice, and I'll get this tacked in. And as I tack this in, I'll watch this and make sure that this stays at the right angle that it needs to be. And then as I work my way out, tacking around this, I'll hammer and form this into place so that it all fits really well as we get all the way around this. Then once we fully weld this, we clean it all up, grind it smooth. You know, to the untrained eye, you would never even know that this patch happened. So we're going to get this tacked in. We'll start getting it welded up. Alright, well, we've got our new piece welded in here. I've got the top side all cleaned up nice and smooth, looks good. I'm going to clean up the bottom side real quick, and then I'm going to do some hammering on this edge here. You can see we've got some wrinkles in here from the chromey aftermarket stamping. So I'm going to do some shrinking and some hammering on this edge and get this all nice and straight and smoothed out again, and then we'll be ready to start fitting the apron up. Okay, so we got our spare tire weld finished up, and now I've got my new front apron skin on here ready to start fitting up. So right off the rip, I can see that over here on the side, I've got some metal that's interfering with my fender bolts. So I'm gonna just mark these, and I'm gonna open this up a little bit more so that we don't have any interference there. And then just like we did on the rear end of the car, we're gonna grab a fender, we're gonna test fit the fender, make sure that our bottom edge of our apron here matches up with the bottom edge of our fender. We're gonna do that on both sides, and then we'll figure out exactly where this front apron skin needs to be. Alright folks, well, I've got this thing fit up on here pretty good. We put our fenders up on here, checked them, they look great. We closed our hood gap looks nice and even all the way around. Our hood is not catching on this hood seal channel, which is a common issue. It's not rubbing on the bottom of the apron, which is also a common issue. So everything's fitting correctly, everything looks good. It's getting kind of late, so I've got it locked in place on my Cleco fasteners here, and in the morning I'll get out here and I'll get this thing welded on. See you guys in the morning. Alrighty, we're back. We are ready to start prepping this thing to weld on. So the first thing we need to do is we need to come and drill us a bunch of holes in here for our plug weld. Same exact procedure we did on the rear apron. So we're going to put some holes on the sides, both sides. We're going to put some plug weld holes on the bottom. That way our apron can weld to our spare tire piece that we put in. Once we get our holes drilled, we'll grind our E-coat off top side and bottom side. Then we will come in and we will spray all of our weld primer on the existing front quarters on the inside and outside of our apron or our spare tire well. We'll spray it on the inside of the apron after we drill the holes. That way everything has really good corrosion protection for after we weld this thing on here. What we don't want to do is leave all of this bare metal inside of our joints here, close it up, and then have no way to get any kind of corrosion protection on the inside, because all that's going to do is make this thing rust out that much quicker in the future. So we'll get all that done, we'll get this thing prepped and ready to go on here, and then we'll start doing some welding. Alright, so we've got our front apron piece all cleaned up and fit and ready to go. See, we've got our inside sprayed with corrosion protection. We've got all of our quarter panel and our spare tire well and everything sprayed with weld primer. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fit our apron up here so that I can mark every single spot where I'm going to weld. That way I can come on here and just clean this up a little bit better so we have really good contact for where our welds are going to be. Even though this is weld primer, it still makes it much easier if we have just a little bit of spot of bare metal where the weld is. So I'm going to clean all of that up and then we can stick this up here and get it welded on. Okay, so we've got our front apron ready to start welding on. So just like we did on the rear, I'm going to get a big vice grip clamp and I'm going to clamp every single one of these plug welds really good and tight before I weld them. That way our sheet metal is nice and tight together. We don't have any air gap. So our plug welds are going to go super easy. Everything will fit really good. So as we go, I'm just going to move that clamp all the way down through here. I'm going to do this side, I'm going to do the other side, and then I'm going to fit up and get the bottom side welded really good where we've got our spare tire well meeting up with our apron. So let's get the welder set up and start sticking this thing together. Okay, so we ran into something that I've seen a lot of times using these aftermarket front aprons, where the contour of this front apron isn't exactly right. So I hammered this into shape as best as I could and got it pretty close to where we were meeting up to our spare tire well on the bottom side. But those pieces just weren't fitting really snug together yet. So I didn't, wasn't gonna give us a good weld seam. So what I had to do is come in here and use my Clecos again. And I've just spaced these out about every other plug weld or so in order to suck those pieces down nice and tight together. And once I got my fasteners in here, then I was able to come back and hammer and dolly this and getting it fit really nice and tight. One of the hard parts about doing this is you can't reach around with your vice grips or something like that to squeeze these two pieces together. So, having these Cleco fasteners makes this, a lot more simple. We just pop a couple of little holes in here. It's gonna hold it right in place where we need it while we come and weld all these up. And I put my fasteners in my plug weld holes. So once I come through here and do every other one, I just come back and pop these fasteners out, and I'll weld the next few holes, and it'll fill my Cleco fastener holes up in the same process. So just a little bit of extra step to get us a better fit and finish on once this is welded up. Okay, so we've got our apron all fully welded on. The last thing we need to do is weld the guide tube for our hood latch cable. But we want to make sure that this gets welded in the correct spot. So I'm going to bolt up my hood latch on here. I'm going to make sure that it lines up. I'm going to make sure that the tube fits in there correctly. And then I'm just going to put a little tack right there on the tube so it'll look, basically the same as it did from the factory. We don't want to go ahead and weld this without fitting our hood latch, or we may end up, having to tweak and trim and bend on this hood tube, and we don't want to do that. We want it to be exactly where it needs to be. So let's get the latch on here. We'll get this all lined up, and then I'll put us a little weld on there, and then we'll be done. Alright folks, so that is going to wrap it up for the front apron on our 1965 Beetle. So we've got our spare tire well rust fixed up. We've got our new apron skin on here. We got really nice fender and hood gaps. So we are done with this. The next thing we're going to do on this car is we're going to be pulling the body off and taking a look at the floor pans, diving a little deeper into the heater channels, see what those are going to look like. So if you want to see that, subscribe and stick around, and I will see you guys next time.